Ξεκινάμε την τρίτη μας συνέντευξη στις απαντήσεις με τη ζωή, με διαφορετικό πλαίσιο, γιατί έχουμε έναν πολύ εκλεκτό προσκεκλημένο που θέλω να του δώσω το λόγο και την δυνατότητα να ενημερώσει τους πολίτες, όλους μας, για αυτά που πράγματι συμβαίνουν σε μια πολύ φιλική μας χώρα, την Βενεζουέλα. I have with me Φαρίντ Φερνάντεζ, the ambassador of Venezuela, a very good friend of Greece, a very good friend of the Greek people, and we're going to have this short interview, this short conversation in order to let the Greek people know what is really happening in Venezuela, what is the truth behind the propaganda, behind the media coverage of the last years over Venezuela. Farid, welcome and thank you very much for coming.
Ευχαριστώ για την πρόσκληση.
Σε ευχαριστώ εγώ. Some days ago, the embassy of Venezuela issued a statement about political speech in Greece over the upcoming elections of Venezuela. Tell us about it.
Well, it is unfortunate, but it is a fact, that in many European countries, Venezuela has been being used as a political weapon, basically by the right against the left, generally speaking. And it is unfortunate that people might not have all the elements because of distortion in the media to honestly and fairly judge what is happening in my country, Venezuela. And especially if you consider the fact that what is happening in my country is important, not only for Venezuela, but for the rest of the region, for the rest of Latin America, and maybe for the orientation that might be able to take or not the debate in Europe about what is left, what the left means in general, what the left means in terms of ideas, of projects, because Venezuela has been in the center of a big hurricane. Venezuela has been one of the very few countries that have tried to raise its voice, to project another, what will maybe be the left in the 21st century, in a war that is currently suffering the consequences of 3 decades of neoliberal revolution. So Venezuela means something. We are sure about that, and Venezuela means something for the right, and Venezuela means a voice that has to be shut down, and Venezuela means an example or a laboratory of what could be the left in the 21st century that has to end. And that's why the right parties, the right medias, the right voices, the right intellectuals, they kept so much criticizing or deforming what is actually happening in my country in order for them to easily achieve one of their goals, which is to complete what I was calling the neoliberal revolution.
Tell us, as codified narrative, but also, I have listened to you speak a lot of times about the example in your country, about what has happened during the last years in Venezuela, ever since Chavez, and tell us what the Greek people do not know. Very often when I visit Latin American countries, I've been to Brazil twice in the last 2 years. And when I speak with Latin American friends, I often say that had Greek people known what had happened in Latin America during the 70s and during the 80s, they would have known how to best defend themselves against what happened to us ever since 2010. So I will use you right now as a person who can say in a few words, but with meaning, what has been happening in Venezuela during the last years, and what was the situation before, what people were up against, and what is now being done, and what is being targeted by those who are not at all happy with the people regaining power.
Well, I think there are two aspects. One is geopolitical, has to deal with geopolitics of our region, Latin America, and this means, I mean, what Venezuela or Latin America was before, and the second aspect is about democracy, I think, democracy, and how our people are able or not to decide what is good or bad for their future, for the country, for their families, for their living. So if you look at the first aspect, what is Latin America since what is the place that has occupied Latin America in the world scene during the 20th century? Latin America basically was a region highly controlled both politically and economically by the United States. Latin America never did really achieve its project for independence that started in the 19th century. Many of our countries indeed have achieved a formal independence, but if you look at in a practical way, we were during all those two last centuries highly controlled by the United States. This means our resources, in the case of Venezuela, our oil industry. This means our people, our politics, our governments, our main political parties, and this means also our way of living. I mean, we have been, let's say, we have been suffering high cultural interference. The thing that the cultural content that we consume or that we can be benefited has been highly influenced by the United States. So when I say that what has happened in the last 20 years in Latin America is geopolitical, it's because you can witness how a region has achieved, has tried to achieve, maybe for the first time after 2 centuries of struggle, quite, let's say, a better level of sovereignty, of independence. That is the first thing I wanted to tell you. The second thing is about democracy, because as we were controlled by the United States, especially during the Cold War, with all this strategy of containing the advance of communist forces during the Cold War, but made by the United States, our political life was distorted by this effort made by the United States. This effort to control our governments, to control the policies that it would apply, and this effort also to contain the advance of the left forces in Latin America. When I say left, I don't say extreme leftist or far leftist forces. I just talk about center-left, even center-left forces that will have simply pronounced the word justice, social justice, or even social democrats have suffered during the Cold War. We have witnessed in many countries dictatorships, right dictatorships. We have even in those countries like Venezuela, in Venezuela we will say that the last dictatorship has ended up in 1958, but even afterwards our democracy was not complete. I mean, the political governments were controlled politically by the United States. So in that sense, we could say that there was a first wave of democracy in the 80s in our region in Latin America. The last formal dictatorships ended during the 1980s. the last, I mean, in Chile, in Brazil, in Argentina, in many of our countries, the last dictatorships ended in the 1990s. But still, democracy was not complete. The center of gravity of our political life was really heading to the right. And what meant the access of Hugo Chavez to the presidency of Venezuela in 1998, and then followed by many lefty presidents in Brazil, in Bolivia, in Nicaragua, was something like maybe opening the political offer to the citizens, to our citizens, so they could really make a choice of what would be the project, what would be the ideas, what would we be discussing about what should be the future of our countries. So that is what is at stake nowadays. We can see that this opening of this democratic opening, that like a second wave of advancing through a more complete democracy, is what is at stake right now in Latin America, and in Venezuela especially. What is at stake is to step back, actually. What they want us is to step back towards what we used to be, controlled, our economy, our politics controlled by imperialism. That is how we have to call it. So our people are struggling. Our people are struggling. Our people are resisting. Our people are trying to fight to defend what was achieved during these 20 years: democracy, social justice, progresses in the access to civil and to public goods, to public services, progresses and in standards of living. And human dignity. That is what it takes in Latin America right now in general, and Venezuela, of course, in particular, because Venezuela was the first country to make this step, and of course we are considered by the United States as a very strategic point in Latin America. But we are resisting, and we are being, of course, highly optimistic about the fact that there is something that has changed in Venezuela and will not be lost forever, ever, never. This is the awakening of the consciousness, of the political consciousness of our people. And this we have it, and we know that we can count on it.
What would you say are the main achievements of the last 20 years in Venezuela when it comes to human rights, civil rights, social rights of the people?
How many hours do we have? Well, there are, the first level will be the level I was talking about, the democratic level. I mean, changing the constitution, recognizing a wider range of rights, of human rights to people, both civil and economic and social rights. The second level will be at an economic level, a strong effort that was made and that is still being made in order to distribute the public revenue to the most popular and affected classes affected by this neoliberal revolution that started in Latin America in 1973, when Salvador Allende was thrown out of his government. So this means access to education, health programs. This means the ability to people to also to through participatory democracy to intervene directly in the public affairs and the administration of public services. And the third level also that should not be underestimated is the cultural progresses that were made in order to promote the Venezuelan identity, the Venezuelan heritage, cultural heritage, and the Venezuelan cultural dignity. If you have been so much influenced by one strong country such as the United States, with its movies, its cars, its sports, its TV shows, and you make the effort to try to promote what you are, what music you can create, what is your theater, movies, etc. This is very important also. We should not underestimate the effort that was made also in recover our cultural dignity.
Mm-hmm. There are elections in Venezuela on the 20th of May, and there is a very big turmoil in the European Union. There was a recent vote in the European Parliament. There's a big turmoil, I would say, also in the US concerning these elections. Mm-hmm. Give us a picture of what has been the electoral history of the last 2 years, I would say, in your country, and also why is there such a reaction against sovereign procedure, a democratic procedure in your country?
Well, first of all, we had more than 20 electoral processes in the last 20 years in Venezuela. I mean, this means more than 1 year. I think this obviously is more than the number of elections that has been taken place in any European Union member or even in the United States. I mean, if you judge it by the number of elections and the turnout in every election, the high level of participation of the people to those elections, Venezuela is indeed a very highly democratized country. Last year, if you judge only by last year, we had 3 elections in Venezuela. This is, again, more than any European country. All those elections were characterized by a victory of the parties that are backing the government. We call them parties of the revolution, participating to our Bolivarian revolution for those last 2 decades. And what is at stake for next Sunday, 20th of May, is the presidential election, where President Maduro is heading, according to the polls, to a re-election, towards a second mandate, and against a number of candidates that are representing an alternative to the Bolivarian revolution. We, according to the polls, again, this opposition to President Maduro will get an honest result, but not enough to change the path that Venezuela has decided to head to. So this is a demonstration of, despite of what the media has been telling you in Europe, despite of the efforts that were made by some countries in North America and in Europe, this means that people are still confident about the fact that those ideas of social justice, of distribution of wealth, and of access to public services, those ideas are still representing a strong social majority in my country. And this is a very good point. This is a point that kept us being optimistic, because when you suffer the kind of sanctions, financial blockade by the United States, when you are struggling to trying to avoid those incredible effects that those sanctions have in our everyday life, those economical difficulties that we suffer, this means that people are still confident about the fact that those ideas that Venezuela has raised against, I mean, we are a leftist country in a rightist world. and Venezuelan people have tasted what it means to truly defend those ideas, and Venezuelan people still want to head that path. About European Union, there is something that we had to accept, and this is fact, that some of us who are defending a stronger union between our Latin American countries, some of us who are, of course, convinced that stronger Latin America should only be achieved by a union, a stronger integration between our countries. Some of us have studied what it means to go through the path of regional integration, regional union. And some of us have studied how the European Union was created, and in order for what were the arguments, the goals that the European Union was trying to achieve. Of course, European Union was promoted in order for it to be a strong actor in international politics, in the international community. European Union has been presented to its citizens like a project that will be able to strengthen the voice of every of its members, for Europe to be an independent actor in the international in the world. Europe has always been a very important economic power, but we have seen that in the last decades the European Union project was promoted as also a factor of international policy for Europe to be more powerful. Well, if you look at what the European Union is doing toward Venezuela and against Venezuela, it seems that this strategy was useless and hasn't worked, because the European Union is doing exactly what President Trump is asking it to do. A continent that has suffered the Second World War, a continent that has suffered one of the darkest pages and hours of history, a continent that will be nowadays not achieving the reason why this European project was promoted, a continent that is following what, as a supremacist and racist president of the United States is asking it to do towards Venezuela, is a continent that is failing. Is a continent that is failing in having or representing an independent voice in the world. And this is very sad, because most of us, we have admired the fact that after the Second World War, French and German would be able to sit in the same table. Most of us, we have respected the fact that the European Union were born upon the ashes of a tragedy. Most of us, we have been interested in what will be a European project for its people. And we are witnessing right now the fact that it is not working. At least in international policy, it is not working. The European Union is not an independent actor, at least towards Venezuela.
Mm-hmm. I have two more questions. One has to do with the basic propaganda right now about the upcoming elections in Venezuela, and namely the narrative which says that these are not democratic elections because the opposition has been banned. You have issued an extremely interesting and enlightening document about myths and truths when it comes to the political situation and the upcoming elections, and also the history behind it in Venezuela. I would like to ask you to tell us about what is the truth behind this narrative which is being used to present the country as a country where there's no democracy?
Well, this is just a narrative. As I said, Venezuela has been strengthening its electoral system for the last 2 decades. And this is a system that is highly, there's a truth from the population, from our people, towards this system. There is no party that has been banned from participating in these elections. I mean, every party that will have been eager to participate in it will have been able to present any candidate. I mean, there is no such thing as that. And in fact, indeed, the opposition is represented in this election. We have something like 6 candidates, and we have one strong candidate of the opposition that is called Henry Falcón, who actually was the head of staff of the last opposition candidate in 2013, Enrique Capriles. Enrique Capriles was the last candidate against President Chavez and President Maduro, and his head of staff was Henry Falcón, who is now participating in this election against President Maduro. So there is a continuity of opposition against the left in our elections. And Henry Falcón is representing this continuity. He's actually being backed by some parties of the coalition of the opposition. The coalition itself didn't want to participate. They didn't respect some rules, and they were actually not able to participate. There are some basic rules, legal rules, if you want to participate in the elections in Venezuela. This is the case in every country worldwide. I mean, I cannot say, for example, tomorrow I want to be a candidate in Greece, for example, okay, or in Bulgaria. I cannot say. In Venezuela too, we have some rules and some laws that need to be respected. Some of these parties, they respected those laws fully during 20 years, and magically, this time they didn't want to respect those laws, and they were not. They didn't want to register themselves before the National Electoral Council, because they were preparing a strategy to under-legitimate those elections, and this is actually an effort that they're making at an international level towards the United States, towards the European Union, for them not to recognize the results of our election. But I can assure you that every party that would have been eager to participate in those elections was able to do so.
And indeed, there are many parties and candidates. Well, I have a sub-question. As I said, there would be 2 questions, but this is a sub-question just for the flair of what your system is like. How are election results counted? How is the ballot taking place?
Well, we have a very, very highly controlled electoral system with many security issues are very important for us. Our system is fully automatic, and it's the transmission of data is encrypted. The encryption key is split in many parts, some parts for the majority, some parts for the opposition, so there is no way to falsificate the results, the digital data. When you vote in Venezuela, you vote in a machine that transmits automatically the data to the National Electoral Council in an encrypted way again, and this machine prints a paper that then you insert in the box. So you vote twice, in fact. You vote through a digital system and through a manual system. This in order to double-check the results of any electoral center in Venezuela. During all those 20 years, during the years that this system was adopted, we have counted on the presence of electoral observers for all our elections, and there was never no organization, no electoral observation mission either it has been sent by European Union, by NGOs. There never has been a statement criticizing the way that our elections were organized. Even former President Carter, Jimmy Carter from the United States, once has stated that Venezuela electoral system was amongst the best in the world. And the problem is not about that. The problem is our political sovereignty. The problem is about whether our Venezuelan people, they trust in it or not. This is about what we care, not the NGOs or what they say in Brussels or Washington. What we care about is how our Venezuelan people trust on our electoral system, and they do trust in it. That's the most important matter.
Indeed. And my final question, which is important for Greeks as well. The Venezuelan people, Venezuela is struggling at this point to survive under very harsh sanctions imposed on it. And the Greek people have been up against threats of sanctions, and sanctions also imposed on them when they were called upon to vote for their fate back in July 2015. Actually, the day of our referendum is your Independence Day. I would like to ask you, what is the experience of these sanctions, and what is the lesson learned by the people when this kind of sanctions are imposed by external forces?
Well, we are suffering a severe financial blockade, asphyxia, and it is very hard for us for our government to develop a broad and wide and economic policy. Simply because Venezuela is not in another planet. Venezuela is inserted in the world economy, and if you have a country like Venezuela that's, of course, depends on the trade that it is doing with other countries, that's a country that is not does not want to be isolated. We have trading strategy with our neighbors. We have developed according to our vision of a multipolar world. We have developed relationships with many countries in the world, with many powerful countries we want to trade with and to exchange with. But this is becoming every day more virtual. We are suffering a financial blockade since last August by the United States administration. We are no longer able to find financement in our economy or access to loans in the markets. Every financial institutional bank that would be doing transactions or giving loan to the Venezuelan government will be suffering sanctions in the United States. So many of the doors of the financial systems are being closed to us, and the price for this is being paid by our people, by our population. Although the Venezuelan government, my government, is making every effort it can in order to direct all the energy that we have, all our resources that we have to social investment and to protecting our people from suffering the effect of those sanctions. This is very difficult. Nowadays we are suffering a very difficult situation. We have, of course, a high inflation rate. We have experimenting difficulties in order to import the goods that we need for our population to meet the high standard of living that we want them to be living with. We have, for example, more than $1.6 billion blocked in a financial institution in Luxembourg, $1.6 billion that was destined to buy food and medicine to our people. There is no legal reason for this money to be blocked in Luxembourg, because Luxembourg has not adopted sanctions against us, but it is the fact that those financial institutions are responding either to the fear for being sanctioned in the United States, either to instructions that the Federal Reserve will directly give them. And well, this is only one example of the fact that if you are indeed willing to be inserted in the world economy, I mean, we have socialist vision, we have leftist idea, but we don't want to be cut from the rest of the world. We want to be inserted in the world economy where we could defend our rights to social justice, but still having trade relationship with the rest of the world. But because of the sanctions, we are not able to do that. And if we are not able to do that, of course, our population are suffering a greater price and suffering the consequences of this.
So basically, the population is suffering the price for resisting.
Of course, and a very high price.
But still, you prove that there is an alternative.
There is an alternative, and this is what is being worked on right now in Venezuela. In fact, we are forced to speed up the transition of our economy towards a new model, new model of diversifying our economy, not depending on oil anymore, of making our people being part directly of the economic plan that we want to define for the years to come. For example, we were forced to ask and for the population to be part of an agriculture, an agro-food, a very big plan of development that would have been the result maybe of a long transition, but because of the sanctions, we are forced to speed up the transition towards a new model, new economic model. So we'll see. The next years, the next month will be decisive, both at an international level. We will be resisting. We know that a strong offensive by the rightist forces, and at an international level, we will be resisting the willing of some states to strengthen the sanctions that we are already suffering. And we also we know that we will be still one of the laboratory that humankind needs in order to think about an alternative to neoliberalism.
Well, Faried, thank you very much for enlightening us on all those issues, and let me ask you to convey to your people the solidarity of our people and the solidarity of all people around the world struggling and resisting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ.
Και εγώ.
freedomtv.gr